Hey folks, welcome to Bobcast. This is your host Bob Tripathi, and with me we have a great guest today who's been in the world of marketing, B2B, SaaS from a long, long time. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. And I have a great guest, as I said, and who's on the other side of the pond in London, UK,
hmm
and that is Lisa Vecchio. So, Lisa, welcome. So glad to have you. And if you don't mind, if you can introduce yourself to the audience, that would be great.
Of course. Well, thanks, Bob. I'm delighted to be on Bobcast, although you did just age me there for a very long, long time. But yeah, I've been in B2B marketing my whole career, coming up to 2 decades. You can hear from my accent, I'm not British though. I grew up in New Jersey, so I've had a very intentional international career where I started my career in the States. I spent 5 years actually out in Australia. And I've been in the UK now for 9 years. So while I've kind of had this international journey, it's allowed me to work with businesses of all different shapes of sizes, all different industries. And it's probably one of my favorite things to do is, I think, connect the dots between this global world we live in and how we market.
Yeah, and if I may say so, you're living the dream of 90% of people here in mainland USA. So kudos to you for doing
I
that,
do
you
have the
know.
advantage of some fun in the summer being so close to Europe.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, you've led marketing teams at a global level. So so how does that differ, let's say, in your journeys in Australia or UK compared to US, you know? So how does the the cultural dynamics, because in America we can be sometimes very straight and, direct. How does that differ, and what have you seen working across the globe?
I mean, I think that's a great question because even I think even in the States, there isn't one type of culture because all the states kind of have their own culture as well. But there for sure is a generalist statement, this idea of being direct, being assertive, and kind of this ladder climbing culture. I think what's interesting is, in the UK, they're kind of this bridge between US culture and European culture because you have a lot of startups coming out of the UK. You have a lot of good funding, and also the language being English helps things. Whereas Europe, Europe is a big statement because Europe are so many different countries with so many different governments, bureaucracies, languages that it can't say that anyone can be an expert at all of them. So I think when you think about managing a global marketing team, you've got to be very, very conscious that you've got a melting pot of cultures and the way people approach their day to day tasks. You've got to spend some time with them to really understand those little nuances.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that also means how you resonate in your communication and what
Mm.
you appeal to, I would imagine. But I would love to learn a little bit about your global marketing and what have you seen. So, for the benefit of the audience, what does like a global marketing leader actually do?
Well, I think it depends on the organization and your role, but a big part of my journey has been really thinking about how to create what I like to call integrated global to local marketing strategies. And part of this is about being an efficient marketing organization. At the end of the day, we're all here to drive awareness and revenue growth for our businesses. But when you've got teams sitting all over the world, it sometimes can be expensive to have every team working on their own project that might not be connected to that bigger global goal. So what I like to do is really kind of bring the organization together on, what are our shared objectives? Of course, aligning those with sales and the business objectives. And then what are the kind of key moments or key themes that we want to accomplish as a team for the year? Those might be attached to, let's say, a product launch or, a key persona that we're going to go after. So ultimately, we can build a marketing plan that's holistic and global, but then it needs to be adaptable for each market. So that local markets are going to want to include case studies that are relevant to their audience, content localization, not just translation of words, but also a tone of voice and examples that may be more locally relevant. Even the visuals need to be adapted to resonate with the different cultures. So ultimately, that's what I aim to do is really think about how we can build a unified global strategy that has local relevancy in order to achieve our goals. Maybe that just sounds like a slogan or some sort of
No,
broad
no.
statement, but that's really, and it means that I've managed. teams, geographically dispersed teams. Some of them are in the US or Canada. Some of them will be, here in the UK or in other parts of Europe. So I think that can be a challenge in itself. Okay, how do we actually align everyone? How do we make sure that everyone understands what we're rowing towards? And then, of course, caring for all those different personalities and cultural nuances that we talked about as well.
Yeah, because here in the US, we take that for granted,
Mm,
because, yeah, sure, we are like a huge country, each state, and whichever way you swing, you can say we have different culture, but at the end of the day, we're kind of homogeneous, right? It's a one country. But when you go in Europe, like, like you have Switzerland, the Swiss respond to things differently than the French, and then to the UK. So, yeah, it's a great point you brought up about localized marketing.
mm.
Right. So, for example, if where you were in your previous roles, how walk us through a specific campaign, like how did you adapt to different cultures?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's about having relationships and ears on the ground. Some organizations are lucky to have sales teams, present or
Mhm.
an office in these markets that you may be going after. And sometimes you might have centralized marketing people who, let's say, have to sit in London but still market to Switzerland in the example that you use. So I think making sure that you really understand your audience and your ICP is so important because you can't just take a US campaign with US examples and US language and roll it out. So at a recent company I had, we were rolling out a new AI tool and we turned that into a big 6 month 360 campaign. So a piece of content that was centered around sentiment, around AI for our user personas. But what was key about that proprietary research is we didn't just go to the US, which was our biggest market. We made sure that we got testimonials and interviews and data points from all of the markets. And what that meant was is when we actually took the campaign to market, every region could then take a slice of that data that was relevant for them and turn that into, paid ad content, organic social content, email campaigns, stories that they could use at conferences and events. So everyone globally is talking about the same pillar piece of content, but on a local level, all of the examples are relevant to their market. So I think that's a good example of kind of global to local distribution. I'll talk about a challenge though. In one of my markets, in Germany specifically, where things are a lot more bureaucratic, a lot slower, a lot of more red tape. Our product wasn't released yet in that market. So working with global marketers all over the world, I had to work with the German team to say, okay, well, everyone else is going to do this big AI push. You guys still have pipeline targets you need to hit. So instead of, giving them all the resources of a big, kind of content design, everything that you need, we actually looked at data to go, well, what's the best performing content in that market? It turned out it was about security, which is no surprise for a market like Germany where they take things like security so seriously. And we were able to just turn that into a quick micro campaign that allowed that local team to run independently outside of the broader global campaign. So I think that's a good example of in marketing, change is constant. You can't always anticipate everything. And when the product roadmap gets pushed back, you still need to push ahead with the things that are going to work, right? So,
Hmm. No, that's a great example. Great example. I was thinking while you were saying about global marketing, I was thinking about the differences with the Germans versus the French,
mm, yeah,
the little nuances. But I know in the US we are still like a wild west, with personal information, privacy law, and so on and so forth, with GDPR just rolling out and stuff. But Europe is much more regulated in that
very
sense,
much. Yeah.
right? So how, when you listen to your American counterparts, do you sometimes like the, oh my God, I wish I could do that? And how does it differ too, for the same
Well,
with you?
it is a little bit like the Wild Wild West, except what like in California and in some certain states that have taken some good precautions. I think if you're working in a global business, my perspective at least is that I'd rather lean on caution rather than on potential spam or giving an end user a potential bad user experience. So while you still can buy lists and call people kind of roguely in the U.S., I'd still advise to kind of lean into the GDPR and more the guardrails on a deeper level and focus more on building your own proprietary data and your own first party lists, right? Through other means. Because as I think we go into a cookieless world and as all these kind of other regulations are just going to become more and more dominant, it's better to kind of own your customer rather than go out and buy your customer. I had an example recently where we had a salesperson in the US go, "Oh my gosh, look, someone's emailed me that you can buy this list. And should we just," and it was like, we could, but is that ultimately going to, give that end user a good user experience because it's not protecting, their data. So that's how I view things, but maybe because I've lived in this world for 10 years now and kind of took businesses through all the GDPR adoption, I feel quite strongly about its value.
So not everyone is a target right here. No, that's great. I mean, and just teeing off on that, have you seen some European countries or market more open to new tech, or still there is a traditional sense of being stuck in some areas, or uh,
I wouldn't say I've got deep expertise in this space. I think, the Nordic countries, there's a lot of innovation coming out of the Nordic countries around AI, and really because they have a lot of government investment in new innovation, new technologies, you'll see that coming from there. Where I'd like to think something like Germany, because it's so heavily regulated, there's just a lot more red tape. It's probably slower to innovate, but none of that is backed by data that I have off the top of my head right now. That's just anecdotally from my experience. Yeah.
no, you're right, because Tesla's big test market is the Nordic countries,
Mm.
right? And whenever they did that test, in those countries it was successful, then they would roll it out to the rest of the world and Europe. So let me shift gears. Let's talk about go to market,
Mm-hmm.
right? So having led global marketing teams, what is your approach to create go to market framework? So if you can walk us through, that would be great. And what are some of the critical framework elements that goes into it, and of course the challenges that come out of it?
It's a big question. I'm
Yes.
not going to lie. I mean, I don't want to say it's too dissimilar to, US approach, but in the sense that ultimately you need to understand what the business goals are, and those then need to translate into strategic go-to-market motions. And I think first and foremost, having an alignment when it comes to the planning stage of that with sales, with CS, having RevOps in the room to really understand what are the growth drivers that are going to get us there. So, even looking at that mix, right? Not just the marketing mix, but where's the pipeline coming from between inbound, outbound, partner, channels, et cetera, to really know what levers we have to be able to kind of push and pull to get to that growth. I think, when it comes to the marketing mix side of things, really making sure that you're looking at previous data to understand what was driving the growth so you can really model what channels to keep turned on, turn off, experiment, et cetera. So for me, I think that's kind of the starting point, and then having those shared KPIs where relevant with those peers in CS if it's about expansion, or sales if it's about new logo growth. And some of those KPIs really need to be centered around what's in control between the two of you. So for example, on the sales side, I think we both should own the conversion rate, not just the win rates between lead all the way through to won or revenue, because it means we can collectively have a conversation about, when we have a leaky pipe, it's not just marketing's problem or sales problem. We can look at the funnel and go, where's the pipe leaking and how can we collaborate on patching it up. So I think that that's really important. When then it comes to kind of global go to market strategy, it's then about, I think, having those, like what I've done in the past is then having those regional workshops, right? We have our forecast, we know what the mix is going to be, but how is that actually locally relevant on the ground? And I think in order to plan, you've got to have the right people in the room, your local sales leader, marketing leader, success leader, talking about macro factors, micro factors, because product market fit, market maturity, and even the product roadmap and how that's going to fit into your growth is going to differ depending on all of those factors in your region. So it's not just a case of, a multiplier across all of your markets. It's really thinking about realistic growth in all of your markets based on those factors. So I guess taking that a step further, when you're actually living the day to day, breathing the day to day of your strategy, on the marketing side of things, marketing is ultimately has a level of accountability for revenue or for those growth drivers. So I like to have kind of my Monday morning marketing revenue leadership meeting, right? Where as marketers, we're going to look at the numbers from the last week. We're going to look at, the metrics, the funnel, and go, are we on track? Are we on target? What are some of the qualitative aspects that happen? Maybe we went to a big conference and there's a takeaway from the conference that we met a big customer or had a webinar, et cetera. so that when we have our cross-functional go-to-market meetings each week with sales, success, partnerships, whomever, we're ahead of the narrative, right? If we know that we're not going to hit target, we can be accountable and say, hey, so this is why we're off this week. Let's say we're talking about inbound pipeline as an example. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that's kind of how I think about go to market generally on a local level, on a global level when we plan, and then kind of day to day ensuring that we've got the right cadence as a cross functional go to market team to manage our targets.
No, no, that's great. That's exactly, I think, what I was meaning to ask.
Mm.
But if you look at the teams, like there are some leaders, who think about like more the merrier. So let's get as many stakeholders as we can, so we can calibrate really good in terms of our GTM framework. How do you go about it, and what do you think some of the most critical stakeholders that need to be in your weekly calibration?
I think there's different layers, right? So at a leadership level, I'm expecting as VP, CMO, senior, whatever of marketing to be with my sales counterpart, probably talking on a daily basis, right? Like we're literally talking strategy in the weeds. We're hashing it out daily. But I think when it comes to that mid layer, those peers need to be talking to. And I'll give you an example. I had a challenge earlier in the year where, as a senior leadership team, C-suite, we're discussing pipeline, and we agree, marketing, sales, and CEO, let's dial up marketing spend on performance. We need to just guarantee, we're going to hit Q1. And while it's a short-term gain, not necessarily part of the long-term strategy, if we were to put 20% more budget in there, how can we model that out? We had the alignment. We execute all the way down. The performance marketers go and execute the plan. And a week later, we're looking at the funnel in those meetings and we're not seeing the pipe created. What's happened here? Is it a lead quality issue? Is it a targeting issue? And I sat down with the leader of the SDR team and he went, I had no idea we were increasing the marketing budget by 20%. I don't have enough SDRs. So, the communication started at the top and it didn't go down, I think, collaboratively to that middle level. We were able to mitigate, but I think that's just a great example of when you say who's in the room, how do you, even if you're having a senior conversation, how do you then bring that mid-level together to ensure they really know the strategy? It's not one-to-one marketing to marketing, it's cross-functional. So people can ask questions, they can understand why some of these decisions have been made. Because I think there's not just one strategy that's set in stone. This is always evolving, as we're kind of looking at the customer journey, looking at, kind of performance overall.
That's great, actually. Great example because the foot soldiers don't know they're fighting the war.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And they're sweaty, they're dirty in those trenches. And yeah, if you're not communicating, you're not transparent, it doesn't make for a good internal culture either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this whole challenge with calibrating and bringing people together, it has always been the case, right? Like we can give it fancy names, but that has always been the change. The biggest shift, as you rightly mentioned, is marketing has gone from a lead gen department to working with closely with sales to close those things, right? So marketers are great at lead gen. Then you have the closing part where you're working
Mm.
with the sales team. Do you see a lot of the leakages, if you will, come somewhere in the middle layer when it comes to SDR, the ground team, nurturing, things like that, or
Two things. So I think marketing's role is not just, in my view, not just lead gen. I think marketing ultimately is accountable for demand creation and then demand capture. And when we talk about where we mostly spend our time, especially in times of efficient growth, it's just, okay, how do we actually just optimize, that bottom of the funnel journey as much as possible? So I don't think it's fair to say it's definitely one stage of the journey. Like it's CRs and they're not picking up marketing leads enough. Like for sure, that's always kind of marketing's view. I really think it's going to vary by business, but you've got to look. I think that's why I think being accountable jointly for lead all the way to close is so important because you might fix one leaky bucket and another leak, pops up over here. And it could be because, hey, you've just got a bunch of new young SDRs in who need training. And then it's okay, what's marketing's role to help them with that training? Maybe we update all the sequences for them, right? So they can kind of open doors easier, or we build them call scripts with product marketing so they know what to say. But it could also be that, hey, it's on marketing's end. We haven't actually optimized the capture piece. We need to look at our messaging on our landing pages, or there's a problem with the lead routing, which is a joint problem ultimately. So I think if you don't have strong partners in RevOps as well, you don't really have someone supporting with the data and the analysis, and then looking and having a team to actually fix the problem. Because you might identify a problem, but if you don't actually have anywhere support to update the front end of the website or change the routing process, it's everyone's problem because you're
Yeah,
not going
it
to hit
is.
your number.
No, no, you're right. And again, that's the biggest mindset shift, at least I have seen in the past
Mm.
15, 20 years, where we have gone from a lead gen department, marketing,
Like
to
marketing
how,
ticks a box, sales ticks a
yeah,
box.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
this is the handoff. But I think that handoff has like kind of blurred out in the past 15, 20 years as such, and you may differ.
I think it's not a bad thing. Like we were calling it previously like a handshake, and a deliberate
Mhm.
handshake where we want it not to just be a here it is, go pick it up and take it, but actually let's smoothly hand over the process. And I think when you think about marketing's role in outbound, that's exactly what it has to be, because it's very hard to measure marketing's impact on an outbound motion. We're there for air cover, we're there to accelerate pipeline, and there needs to be a really clear communication on coverage around target account lists, all the different touch points, et cetera. So I agree with your point. Is it's definitely evolved. And when you look at any organization, and any question a salesperson's going to ask or a marketer's going to ask is, hey, what's the relationship between sales and marketing? You definitely want one where it's collaborative and not what it was with all the finger pointing, although it still exists in many places.
Yeah, yeah, it's human nature, right?
Yeah.
So, what is the best way to build relationship with your sales counterparts? Have you seen,
Yeah,
rather,
yeah. I
have
mean,
you seen that works?
one of my personal values is, build bridges with impact. And I think I encourage that with my team as well, is to really think about their stakeholder map. Because, the more that you're making a targeted effort to build relationships with people, and it's everything from like, hey, let's just go have a coffee. I want to hear about your kids, or just those little moments that make people feel valued and heard. Those are the ways I think to kind of embed yourself, in other teams. And it makes it a lot easier when you need to ask for a favor, or you are in one of those meetings that are inevitable where there's a bit of a battle on,
Yeah.
who needs to do what, where you're a little bit more understanding of the person's perspective. So, I mean, in my opinion, that's it, is make the effort, even if you have like a prickly pear on the other side who's kind of rejecting your romance, not in the wrong way, but of, hey, let me get a coffee. Let's just sit down and catch up about the weekend. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult to have those weekly go to market meetings if everyone's got their back up.
Yeah, otherwise you just enter into a room and it's like guns pointing at
Cold
each
and
other,
yeah,
and it's just not fun, right? And we've all been there, and I think over time we reject that notion of working and leadership and
yeah.
managing and things like that. So let me shift. Sorry, you were gonna say
No, I was
something.
going to give you an example, and the reason because it's relevant to the cultural side of thing that we started on. But when I first moved to Australia, I moved with an organization that was US. I was in the US. They moved me to Australia, and when I got there, my initial attitude about it was that, oh well, if they've moved me here, it's because they want me to do what I did over there here in Australia. And I very quickly did not make fast friends with the sales team, who where culturally Australians, and this is a generalization, they want to feel different. They're a very strong kind of individual identity that they don't want to do what the US is doing. They want to do what Australians do. And so my kind of bulldozing in wasn't really well received. And right away I kind of butted heads with the sales leader, and I had the general manager. We were meant to go away to a conference together, and she said, oh, you guys going to be okay? Like, clearly you guys don't get along. And I was really offended by that, because I'm like, well, I'm a nice person. Like, I both have the same goals.
My
And it
mom
was,
says the same thing.
I know.
Ask my mom.
So when I actually sat down with this guy, and I was like, oh, she's kind of worried that like we're not going to get along. And can you let me know like what it is about me that's upset you? And he said, well, I thought you were upset with me. And just by having that conversation and realizing, no, we both have a lot of respect for each other, and there was a little bit of misunderstanding. From that point on, we worked together like hand in hand, and it
Wow.
just changed the
Wow.
whole dynamic. I think just by being vulnerable, putting yourself out there and going like, let's make this work, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great example. I had a similar situation too, many years back,
Mm,
and I was a little bit on the younger side, and the
yeah,
guy,
same. Yeah.
yeah, the VP of sales was like, "What does he know, right?" Like kind of, that attitude, which is normal. And I think over time, like once he saw that how much lead we were generating for
Hmm.
them and how we were getting about going from an MQL to SQL, he started respecting the skills, And once he started respecting the skills and we were on two different coasts, he started trusting more.
Yeah.
So sometimes like when you can't sit in the same restaurant or whatever, but there's a different way that people warm up to us too. That's what I
I think
noticed
I
early
think
on.
that's the perfect example because when your question you asked about working with sales teams or new teams, sometimes, and I think with sales a lot, you have to prove. You don't ask for permission, you just do it. You ask for permission, not forgiveness, or you ask for forgiveness, not permission. That's how it goes. And you just do your thing, right? Because you're an expert, you know what you need to do. And then they go, oh, that was amazing. I didn't know we can do that. And all of a sudden, your credit went from here to here. And I agree. I've seen that before.
Let me move on to everyone's
Sure.
favorite topic, and that is AI,
Said
right?
it.
Yeah, so you talked about demand gen, but from sitting where you are, not just leading marketing departments, but also globally, what impact it will have if it hasn't in terms of AI, in terms of a B2B marketer's world?
Significant. I was at an event last night actually with LinkedIn, and they said that, marketers are kind of the biggest adopters of AI and going to kind of be leading the change, whether you believe that or not. There was a bunch of data to support it. But look, I think its role in marketing, there'll be some roles that will be disrupted, and that's okay. I'm seeing a couple areas. One is ideation. Obviously, AI is super helpful and a no-brainer when it comes to helping marketers kind of just advance their thinking around campaign ideas, brainstorming, ICP, like just really that work that you could get a bunch of creatives in the room, but it just gets the spark going. Like sometimes that's what you need. I think from a productivity standpoint, there's so much out there that's making marketing's jobs so much easier, and even efficiency, I think, is the third point. So you look at tools like Jasper, other content tools where you can just like that. You don't necessarily need a junior copywriter to take your long form content or an agency and then turn that into your social post and your email campaign and your this and your that. You've got tools to do it for you. So I think it's going to transform how marketers not necessarily go to market, but they do their day jobs, how that affects our budgets, how we organize our teams, how we select our agencies. And ultimately, I think as a marketer, I'm not the most proficient AI marketer yet, I'll say. And one of my personal goals this summer was like, I literally wrote down, like, get better at AI marketing, right? Like, just test everything, like, listen to the webinars, download tools. Like, there's the video avatar tool called Synthesia, and I'm just like, and you can try it for free. And I'm like, I'm just waiting till I get the perfect example so it to feed it so it spits out my head and talks like me. But I haven't figured out what it is yet because I'm dying to test it. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but it's for sure AI is a marketer's game. We're just at the cusp of how, like, just getting started and really using it and forming our teams around it on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's great, and it shows the your framework prowess because you framed it up in terms of ideation, productivity, and efficiency. I
Mm,
think those are the three big impacts it
yeah.
will have, right? No, this
But
is great. One of the things that I often get asked is like, what kind of KPIs and success metrics like at a B2B marketing level you measure?
yeah,
Your top KPIs, go-to KPIs, and like for
yeah.
example, in your weekly GTM meetings, what are the numbers that you discuss? Like this is the data.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say it's going to vary based on your audience, and it's very clear. based on the move to efficient growth, see you later growth at all costs, that the board, the C-suite, they don't want to hear about any of the vanity. No one ever wanted to hear about any of the vanity metric. Let's just be clear. But it's really about revenue, qualified pipeline, LTV to CAC, like just get us there, right? Like the margins. But when I think about if I were to build, and so one layer down from that is your unified go-to-market, right? And so from a marketing team perspective, you're mostly focusing on the conversion stuff, right? You're going to focus on, your, hate to say it, but your MQL volumes, because no one wants to be accountable for volumes, your overall qualified pipe number, your cost per opportunity number. But when it comes to building marketing dashboards, I think, and I was speaking to a CEO the other day who went, that's too many things. And I said, that's too many things for you as the CEO, but as a marketing team, we need to understand where the growth is coming from. And I think they kind of belong in two buckets. So one is getting found. Those are your awareness metrics. Web visits, branded search, share voice, convert. That's kind of the metrics we just talked about, right? Like the MQL, the conversion rates, all of that, qualified pipeline. But then I think, and these two metrics have become more important in the last year for me, and was probably not as much on my dashboard as they are now, is the retention metrics, right? So NPS, or depending on your product, active users, and really going, is it sticky? Are people happy? Because if not, we don't need to be focusing on top of funnel driving pipeline. We need to be focused on working with product and actually fixing, kind of that whole customer journey from the adoption phase. And the final one is expansion. Again, to that point, really understanding NRR. And I think a lot of marketers, at least from my experience, kind of growing up in the business, it was always pipeline and it wasn't NRR. And NRR is so important now, as businesses are realizing they've been leaking out the back and they haven't really diversified their add-on or their expansion strategy to drive growth. Because for some markets, the TAM, or the serviceable TAM, is only so big, right? So you've got to be more creative there about where your revenue is going to come from.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. One, I'm gonna change tracks a bit before, and then I'll let you go, I promise.
No, that's okay. This is fun.
But one of the challenges, again, and as a male, I don't really think about it, because
Hmm.
those are the lenses I have. But the woman leadership in a workforce, right? Are we evolving fast enough? Is there a lot to do? And related to that question is, um, how have you seen unique challenges that you must have faced that you saw from your lenses, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, would love to hear about it and what kind of initiatives that you see people doing to level the playing field.
I think to answer your first question, like, is enough being done, or is enough being done fast enough? Probably not. I think it starts with the top. And it's interesting. I was talking to a headhunter about a role yesterday, and he said, have a look at it. They're going through this transformation, et cetera. And I said, everyone on here is like a white middle-aged dude. And this feels like they want to hire a woman as a diversity hire. But to me, this tells me that this organization even hasn't culturally kind of really moved on in terms of, like, I connect that even to how I would go to market, and being able to kind of sell in my ideas to an entirely middle-aged male board. And I'd feel that it's just going to be that much harder. And part of it is, I think, because marketing as well, like, I don't know what the percentages are, but there are more females than males in marketing, but at the leadership level, there aren't, right? And marketing already is hard enough to, I think, justify the ROI, get buy-in for brand, have a seat. Again, the percentage of marketers on boards is like women marketers, and then women marketers on boards is like tiny, tiny, tiny. And so I think we're kind of fighting this dual battle as marketers and as women. So I think it starts with the top. And I want to work with CEOs and C-suites who don't want to hire marketers because it ticks a box, but because they actually, they're the right people for the job, and they get energy not just from male versus female, but cross-cultural backgrounds, different educational backgrounds. I think there's a bigger diversity question at play. So that's kind of like point one. Point two is, I was talking to a friend this morning. She was asking me about my personal brands on LinkedIn. And she goes, I just feel like when I'm listening and trying to engage on LinkedIn, all of the voices, all of the thought leaders are men. Where are all the women marketer thought leaders? And I said, there's a woman called Jane Serra who runs a podcast, Women in B2B Marketing. So if anyone wants to listen to it, and that's exactly what she's trying to do, right? She's trying to give more voice to women senior marketers through LinkedIn, through podcasts to share their stories. And so is it because, all of the data that says, okay, women are less likely to speak up than men, they have less confidence in these situations than men? I don't know, but I'm going to keep leading as an example. And, I get feedback from people on my team and whatnot that makes me feel like I'm doing my little part because they see me step up and do the talks in front of the whole office or do podcasts like this that then I share on social media. And I think it does inspire those people who may be unsure of if their voice counts or if they have to have a certain level of credibility or just to share their insights. So I think that's like my little part of giving back. If it helps inspire anyone, then great. But I think we're going to continue to have a long way to go as businesses transform with kind of a new way of working and thinking as we kind of go through the next generational turnover as well.
No, that's amazing. I've been in places where it was a total boys club, and then they would have a woman, as a vanity metric,
Mm,
So it's very sad, and from a male point of view, sometimes we don't see that, right? Just the
mm.
lens we grew up with. But personally, I have always hired, and it's gonna piss some people off, but that's fine. But I've always hired women creative designers,
Okay.
graphics, all through my life. And
Yeah, I was going to say, why is that? Yeah.
the reason is, a very simple example is the empathy, the
Mm,
softness in designs. It comes through, right? And people can disagree. But so a good example is like, back in the day before AI, we used to do these graphic banners. If you give that to a guy, he would do a straight banner. If you give that same task to a woman, she would do a rounded edges. And when you have a rounded edges in your graphics, it softens the look, the tone
mm.
on your site because it's all about experience and the color code and stuff like that, right? So I've always believed that, and I know it sounds sexist, but it is what it is, Big question. Another big question. If you were to give, looking back in hindsight, if you were to advise your young self in terms of career progression, and so many of our listeners would be on that side, how would you approach your career differently today than what you did back then, especially in the world of tech and AI and things like that? So,
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, but it's a good one. So I like to think, and I don't know if this is unique or, in any way, but that I was quite purposeful with my career. So I knew early on that I wanted to build an international career. So I targeted companies that were global so I could put my hand up to say, move me. Or I knew that marketing is not one thing, marketing's lots of different things. So when I was, in university, I did lots of internships, I did PR, I did advertising, I did events just to try things on for size. So I think that's one of my tips is, remain curious, ask questions. If there's something you want to do, go and take the steps to carve the path to do it because no one's going to know what you're thinking. No one's going to know. And if you're not sure, try it. Right now, I'm in between roles and I'm trying everything on for size. I'm having conversations with lots of people because there is no one thing, right? You can add value and get joy from what you do in so many different ways. So I would encourage myself to remain as curious as I was and to be as, I guess, targeted as I was. But at the same time, I think that sometimes you get given these paths. For example, I fell into B2B by accident. And I kind of really rejected the idea of like that I was in B2B for a long time because I didn't feel like it was as cool or as sexy as like being in B2C or advertising. And so I wish, and then when I did embrace it now, like I love it, right? Like I talk about it all the time. I'm very heavily, invested in the B2B community here in the UK. I wish I was more like easy on myself. I think that's just something like a little bit more forgiving. And I think that's just a general thing where people need to be kinder to themselves because it's not so bad, right? Is it? And everyone should be really proud of getting to where they are in the first place. So Yeah, that's it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So Lisa, I know you're gonna get a lot of LinkedIn requests. Is that the only platform? How do people find you? So if you can give
Yeah,
your handle.
I'd be more than happy to connect with anyone, jump on a virtual coffee with anyone. But please, yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to get me. So you can just find me through Lisa Vecchio,
Which is Vecchio.
Chio.
Oh, all right. This is great, Lisa. Thank you so much for spilling out all the insider tricks, tips, and the path forward. So thank you so much. Hopefully we'll talk soon. But this is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks everyone for listening. It's been really fun.
Thank you.